Welcome. Thank you for joining this. My name is Zandbelt. I work in the office of the CTO of Ping Identity, and I represent the CTO office in Europe. I'm going to talk about identity and APIs and the role that digital identity can play for your APIs. I'll start off by looking at the trends and the state of the art in APIs and cloud identity management. Then we'll dive into the relationship between identity and APIs, and I'll finish up with some recommendations about API strategies. So let's start off with an overview of the trends. So what I've depicted here is what I've labeled Cloud 1.0, is a situation that often exists today. We see a typical enterprise business having deployed a few applications within the corporate network, and people can use these applications maybe because they have an account in an LDAP directory. They access these applications, and sometimes they have application-specific accounts, sometimes they use the accounts in the LDAP directory. And on the other side of the corporate network, outside of the firewall, we see a number of cloud applications that are being used by the enterprise business. And these applications typically don't have any relationship with the corporate applications, and these applications typically implement their own account management, their own security policies, and users log into them with application-specific credentials. And this is a situation that is unmanageable when it scales up to a very large number of applications, because you can't really expect users to type in application-specific passwords over and over again. You can't expect a company to keep up with compliancy rules when they have no control about cloud applications. So we need to come up with a way to harmonize this access management across corporate applications and cloud applications. And the firewall, the big old firewall in the middle, that was once so useful for controlling access to your locally hosted applications, well, that thing doesn't work for cloud applications, right? And we need to come up with a different paradigm there. So these changes in the cloud, they actually happen in 3 dimensions, right? So first of all, we have the change of users, because where an enterprise business would typically have to do only with signing on employees to cloud applications and local applications, we're now looking more and more at different use cases where an enterprise business also needs to open up its own infrastructure to its customers or its partners, or the applications that a partner runs, right? Suddenly we need to deal with inbound traffic as well as outbound traffic. And the second dimension of change is the change in devices, right? So suddenly nowadays we do no longer deal just with the corporate desktop residing in the corporate network, but we have to be prepared to deal with laptops accessing our applications, tablets accessing our applications, and these devices typically have different capabilities as well, right? So some of them may have browsers that can render HTML. Some of them may have very small screens and will be able to deal with native applications only. And then there's the change of who owns the device, right? More and more users expect to bring their own device to the corporate enterprise businesses and use their applications from that device that they already own, as opposed to the situation where the corporate desktop that is fully owned by the enterprise business is used only for accessing these applications. So that's the second dimension of change. And the third dimension is the location of users and services. So suddenly users can roam. They take their laptop, they take their mobile device, they go somewhere else, they get online, and they expect to access their applications just like they could do when residing within the corporate network. And services, the location of services has changed as well, right? Now we have a mix of services residing within the corporate network as well as services that are hosted in the cloud. So dealing with all of that requires a different architecture, and that's the one that I've labeled Cloud 2.0 over here, where the role of the firewall, you see that the big firewall has shrinked a bit, is less important because it cannot deal with the type of access control that we need to leverage. It can deal with transport layer security, but not with the application level security that we want to address here. And if you want to find one connecting piece of information that is shared across all of these applications, both corporate and cloud ones, that is the user's identity, right? So at the heart of this new infrastructure should be the user's identity. That's something that the user wants to use across all of the different applications. And you don't want to rely on firewall rules for that. You want to rely on rules that you can enforce to applications based on the identity and the user identity information. So that's where we want to go. So the consequence is that we can do away with the firewall because it cannot deal with cloud applications and mobile native applications. And some people have been calling this identity is the new parameter. So I'd like to change that a bit because identity is not the new parameter, something that is limiting. Identity is the key that you can actually use to cross the new parameter, which is the parameter that is cloud access or access to applications in general. So let's look at the role of identity for APIs, right? So first of all, I'd like to introduce you to the concept that I've labeled the Internet Scale Identity concept, where you separate the user authentication and account management from the application itself. We probably all know this from the web SSO world, where you leverage a concept called identity provider that is a specialized party that hosts your account, where you can manage your account, where you manage your single set of credentials, and you use that to log in into a whole variety of services and applications. So you outsource the authentication of users and access control to a specialized party. You externalize that from the application. That makes it scale a lot better, makes it easier to manage for both the end user as well as the service provider. And now the idea is that you try to harmonize that and extend that from web SSO into the API world as well. So suddenly you can manage your access policies in a uniform way across web applications and native applications. And that would really be a powerful thing to do, right? So we address security in a very generic way, but at the same time, we introduce convenience for the user because he can use his one and only account to access all of these applications across web and across mobile. And that's a convenience as well for the end user. So this is a very unique case where security and convenience go hand in hand, which is a great thing, of course, to have. So this also would allow us to extend the corporate enterprise business security policies from the corporate network into the cloud applications. And that's a must-have if you want to deal with compliancy and regulations at some point. A look at the play field where we're actually focusing now. This is the play field of user identity and the play field of the company like ours. So we focused at the first place, we focused on web-based SSO, where a browser would access a web application. We introduced identity into the mix to make it more scalable, secure, and manageable. And now we try to do the same thing for API access, right? Native applications accessing REST-based services, leverage the same identity, leverage the same concept to secure our REST-based applications as well. And in the middle of all of that is, of course, user provisioning as well. So services and applications need to have accounts created for users before users can actually sign on to them. And in that space, we have to think about user account provisioning through protocols like SCIM, as some of the other speakers will talk to today. So that's the world that we're looking at. So where do the APIs come into play? Well, it's something that's called the API economy. Other people have already spoken to this. APIs are becoming more and more important. We see APIs everywhere, right? We need APIs to expose our data. We consume APIs to access data. And we see that trend popping up as part of some of the big other trends, being the cloud business, mobile applications, big data, bring your own device. All of it leans on APIs. And how do you secure those APIs, right? By the way, API traffic in terms of megabytes for Salesforce, for example, already exceeded, the API traffic exceeded 60% of the traffic in total. So it exceeded the web traffic for the browser-based traffic already 2 years ago. And this trend has only continued since then. Also, as part of platform as a service offering, we see more and more APIs popping up where platform as a service vendors open up their platform through APIs to expose their own cloud services, the configuration of those cloud services. And a very clear trend for all of these APIs is REST, of course. I think that most of the public-facing APIs anyway today, you hardly find any new interfaces that use SOAP anymore. It's all about REST. So let's look at the security, about access control for these APIs. So for traditional SOAP APIs, you can say about SOAP whatever you want, but at least it had a specification for securing those APIs. The WS security spec, WS trust specifications, they at least specified how you would use tokens to access a SOAP-based API. And for REST, there is really no such thing. There was no such thing until OAuth 2.0 came along. That would explain how you use tokens, how you obtain tokens, and how you validate tokens for REST-based APIs. So before that, I think passwords was the only mechanism that you would have to secure those APIs. And that's just not a very scalable thing, as the following slide tries to explain, because it leads to what is called the password anti-pattern. If you hand out your password as a user to different third-party clients, both native clients and third-party server components, these clients need to store your user password. That's not a very good thing because it greatly enlarges the attack surface on your password, right? It's stored in many different places where people can actually find it. It also teaches users the wrong idea, because users are going to put their password into random boxes popping up in random applications, which is not a very good thing to do either. And it makes it very hard to upgrade the authentication for that service, right? Once you've put in a password into a remote application or a native client, it's fixed, right? You can't upgrade to second factor authentication on the back end because it will break your client or your third-party service. The same goes for federated authentication. And it has no granularity. Anybody that has obtained your password can do anything you can do with that password, right? So it's not, you can't limit to read or write operations. You can do anything. It has no differentiation because a backend service wouldn't be able to tell the difference between you or an application that got hold of your password, right? You can't tell the difference between the two. And it has no revocation. If you want to change your password because it got compromised, you would have to go into each of these clients and change that password at the same time. It just doesn't scale and it's not secure. So this is where OAuth 2.0 came into the mix. There were actually 4 major drivers for the design of OAuth 2.0. It was the lack of standards to secure your API for the REST world. It was the password anti-pattern, the rise of the native mobile applications, and the rise of REST-based cloud APIs in general that all led to the OAuth 2.0 efforts. So what is OAuth 2.0? Well, I won't go into any detail because, for example, Travels will do that, the flows, but it allows for secure API authorization or delegation. It's a very simple standard, REST-y, JSON-like, and it allows you to secure your RESTful APIs. And that's, I think, what I would like to say about this slide, and we'll move on to the benefits that you get out of it. First of all, OAuth is a very big specification. It's a framework, right? And it allows for many different use cases. It covers both consumer identity use cases as well as enterprise access use cases. It allows for security and usability at the same time. That's a very good thing. It allows for granularity. You can hand out tokens with scopes that limit that token to a particular usage, like read or write. And it covers revocation as well, because you can revoke a token for a specific application. So those are some of the nice benefits there. One sidestep on that, which is an area that we've been looking into recently, is SSO for mobile applications. And that's an interesting paradigm in itself, because suppose you have like 10 different applications all implementing OAuth 2.0 very nicely. You have a secure environment, but users might still have to type in their credentials 10 times as they use these different applications over the course of an hour. And so SSO for mobile applications really doesn't exist, and is something that is being specified right now, and we're joining forces with VMware and Salesforce on that to define a component that would take care of managing a whole set of OAuth tokens for individual applications, that would be responsible for going out and getting those tokens, managing them and redistributing them to the individual applications, and would take care of single sign-on between these mobile applications, right? Something that you can't do today if there's no relationship between those applications. So this is something that is under development, and it's something that might interest you. If you want to talk about that with us, please do. Then we'll move on to recommendations. Recommendations about how you could design your APIs. First of all, you should think about not just a single use case, right? You should think about handling various use cases, not just outbound identity, not just signing on your customers to your applications, but also signing on partners to your applications, or even consumer identity use cases. You should be prepared to deal with a variety of use cases when you design your infrastructure, your APIs. And you should also be prepared that you will have to deal with multiple devices, right? It's not just about mobile applications. You may want to distribute the same information to desktop browsers, right? So if you think about these multi-use case scenarios, multi-device scenarios, and even multi-channel scenarios where you actually use different channels to get to your customers or users, you will have to think multi-protocol as well. There's no single protocol that deals with all of these use cases, right? What you can do is think about how identity connects all these use cases, devices, and channels, right? So that's really the shared concept that you may try to leverage. And if you think about your identity and access management strategy for your APIs in that way, you will be prepared to deal with changes and new developments as well. Interoperability and standards is going to be an important thing, right? The cloud, by definition, extends itself across various domains. And if you want to create interoperability between these domains, you have to deal with standards, right? So standards are an important thing here, even though Twitter and Facebook may lead the way. Ultimately, people will need standards to implement to create an interoperable infrastructure across different domains. I also would like to point out that you should think about identity and access management not in a limiting way as something that you need to do because it secures your environment, right? It can also be a business enabler, because suddenly your users or your customers will have a much easier time signing on to your infrastructure with an already existing account or through SSO, right? So it's not just a limiting thing, it also enables your customers or partners to sign on to your infrastructure, and that's a good thing. And the last thing here is the architect for agility is again about being prepared to deal with changes, right? The cloud is changing rapidly, and if you bolt yourself onto a static infrastructure, by definition, your business is going to fail. You need to be prepared to deal with changes like new protocols, like new systems. So what does that mean for your API? Well, your API should definitely look for externalization of authentication and authorization, right? Don't handle the authentication of users, the authorization of users all in your application, in your backend service yourself. Try to externalize as much as possible and try to centralize it into a shared component. And try to get away from distributing passwords to applications. Try to start use tokens. And if you want to base yourself on a standard, you're probably looking at OAuth for token management. Also, do not just design your application for consumer identity or enterprise identity, because we see a lot of scenarios where one blends into another, and you may want to start thinking about that when you design your application at first. You can have consumer identity and enterprise identity handled through the same protocols and the same set of infrastructure components. So by leveraging identity, you can actually handle your API access, so for mobile and server-to-server traffic, much in the same way as web single sign-on, in which you have already made investments, perhaps. So that's a very powerful thing to do. Also to reuse your security and identity policies that you already have for the web SSO world, for the internal world, reuse that across APIs as well, even cloud APIs. That's a very powerful thing to do. And hooking up an existing identity store instead of creating an application-specific identity store with user information in there. There's no need for that. By externalizing all of that, you can actually connect your existing identity store and control your API access through that. And then, if possible, you can try and implement all of this with a single system, right? It's there's a whole bunch of use cases and protocols involved, but there are systems that can actually implement all of these protocols. Why not leverage that? So expect more change. That's the last slide I have. There's, of course, an ever-continuing trend towards SaaS adoption, platform as a service adoption, and even identity as a service, which is also something that we do. And all of these platforms and services, they include APIs, and the number of APIs embedded in there will only increase. And expect that 2013 is going to be the year of identity standards. OAuth 2.0 being deployed right now, standardized already. OpenID Connect will be finalized this year and will be available for rollout too. And we really expect that the business that is done using these protocols will greatly expand in the coming year. So that was really all I had to say. So thank you